Right, good morning, Year 8. Second lesson of the fortnight here. Last lesson we looked at Victoria. This time we're looking at some other women, Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole. You may have heard of them, you may not have. But hopefully by this end of the lesson you will know what to do. Our objectives are aims for today. 1, I wanted to identify the changes made by Florence Nightingale. 2, I wanted to compare Nightingale and Seacole's life. 3, I want to debate whether some of the new hospitals that have been created, the emergency hospitals, should maybe be called Seacole hospitals and not all called Nightingale hospitals like they are. Before we get started, I need you to write the date in your book, the title in your book, and you need to have a go at these 5 questions on the board. The only resources you need for today's lessons are your pen, your paper, your book. If you've got a printer, you can print out the information sheets. If you've not, don't worry about it. And you also need the link that's in the email from your teacher to the forms on the little quiz form at the end. So pause, get that information written down, let's get started. So hopefully we've got them questions answered. Let's check them. Red pen, let's go. There are the answers. 1837, Victoria's crowned. She marries Prince Albert. She takes the title Empress of India at the suggestion of Benjamin Disraeli, who was the Prime Minister, her favourite Prime Minister. And Darwin's theory of evolution was used to distort the view of the empire and to make the British, or make some British people, think that they had the right to go to other lands and to sort of force their will on other people. Florence Nightingale, also known as aka the Lady with the Lamp, was a British nurse, statistician and a social reformer who was the foundational philosopher of modern nursing. Nightingale was put in charge of nursing British and Allied soldiers in Turkey during the Crimean War. She spent many hours in the wards, and her night rounds giving personal care to the wounded established her image as the Lady with the Lamp. Her efforts to formalise nursing education led her to establish the first scientifically based nursing school, the Nightingale School of Nursing at St Thomas's Hospital in London, and that was opened in 1860. So Florence Nightingale transforms the way people think about nursing. She serves with the British at in a war called the Crimean War, which we'll talk about later. And a lot of her rounds were done at night, as you can see in this photograph down here, or this painting down here. And it's carrying that sort of tea light that gets her the nickname, the Lady of the Lamp. She formalises education for nurses to make sure the whole sort of body of nurses get better at being nurses, and that's one of her most important legacies. Okay. So when she arrived at the Crimean War, she found the hospital conditions to be in very poor state. Many of the wounded were unwashed and were sleeping in overcrowded, dirty rooms without blankets or decent food. In these conditions, diseases such as typhus, cholera and dysentery spread quickly. As a result, the death rate amongst wounded soldiers was very high. Most soldiers died from infections and diseases. Only 1 in 6 died from their war wounds, the other 5 or 6 died from infections and disease. So what Nightingale noticed when she arrived is the conditions that the hospitals are as deadly as the battlefield. So she goes around sort of making hospitals cleaner, safer, and therefore the life expectancy increases. She didn't understand why disease was spreading, okay, and to do with germs and things like that, but she knew that dirt, and she knew that the uncleanliness and the lack of sanitation was making people worse. So she has this huge big campaign to try and make hospitals cleaner, try and make them airier, which transforms sort of the hospitals and makes people survive, or increases the survival rate. So it all takes place for a war, during a war over this place on this map here called the Crimean, which is this little peninsula here. Okay. Now the British and the French with some others worked together to try and stop the Russians. And the reason for this is what we, as British, don't want is the Russian Navy, okay, growing in influence. We don't want, and this links back to what we talked about a few weeks ago, the Russian Navy being able to get through this bit of water here called the Bosphorus, or the Straits of the Dardanelles, because if they get through there, they can get into the Mediterranean. If they can get into the Mediterranean, they can start to bother our interests in Egypt. Okay, remember we've got that land, and they can maybe come through Gibraltar, and they can start bothering us here. So what we want as British people, or as the British government, is we want the Russians sort of pinned in. Okay, you may think, oh, the Russians can get to sea up here, but in the winter, this is all frozen, okay, and this is frozen. So the Russian Navy needs to use this See here, because this is a warm water port. So in short, Britain were worried about the growing Russian influence, and we wanted to stop this. If they grew, the balance of power would be stabilised. I.e. the balance of power where everybody in Europe checks each other and we get to get really powerful, okay, would be destabilised. That's all we need to know about the Crimean. Okay, not too important. If you want to know more, there is a video in the link below. Click that and have a watch of that. So what I want you to be doing now is you're pausing the video and you're answering these two questions. Okay, like we've looked at before, we've got that symbol in the top corner there. So pause. Why did Nightingale get the nickname the Lady with the Lamp? And two, what were the problems with the hospitals in the Crimea? Okay, so they're your two questions. Let's get them done. And go back through the video if you need to, but we'll pause there. Thank you. So we've looked at a very simple introduction to Florence Nightingale. Okay, there's loads of stuff out there which you can look at yourself. Okay, and I didn't want to do too much on her because often she's covered in Key Stage 2. Mary Seacole, however, isn't covered as much, so I want to spend a little bit more time on her because she's sort of an heralded person in history, and maybe some would say more important or equally important. Mary Seacole was born in Jamaica more than 200 years ago. This was during the period when many black people in the Caribbean were forced to work as slaves. Although Mary's mother was black, her father, James Grant, was a white Scottish army officer, and Mary was born a free person. She spent her youth around her mother, who taught her about traditional medicines and stressed the importance of caring for the needy. As a young adult, she travelled around helping in disease-hit crisis zones, including Panama and her native Jamaica. So she worked against a disease called yellow fever, against cholera, trying to help other people. So the values her mum instilled in her, of caring for the needy, of looking after people, really came through. She visited Britain when she was young, where she experienced racism. She saw herself as only a little bit black, okay, but she still experienced racism because she appeared different to other people, which sort of talks about the time, and maybe that's one of the reasons why she has been forgotten in history, because of her colour, because of her background. So when the Crimean War broke out, or the Crimea War broke out, Mary travelled to England and approached the British War Office, asking to be sent as an army nurse to the Crimea, where she'd heard there was poor medical facilities for wounded soldiers. She was refused. So she volunteered. She said, right, I want to go and help. Let me go and help. And the British Army officer said no. Okay, the British Army officer said, we don't want your help. Undaunted, she funded her own trip to Crimea, where she established the British Hotel with Thomas Day, a relative of her late husband Edwin. The hotel provided comfortable quarters for sick and recovering soldiers. At the time, Mary was well known in Britain as Florence Nightingale. Miss Nightingale's famous military hospital was situated hundreds of miles from the front line in Scutari, now called Üsküdar, just outside the Turkish city of Istanbul. But Mary's hotel near Balaclava was much closer to the fighting. So she's much closer than Florence Nightingale. She was able to visit the battlefield, sometimes under fire, to nurse the wounded. Indeed, she nursed the sick soldiers so kindly they called her Mother Seacole. So Florence Nightingale did a great job, but she was a long way back. Mary Seacole was at times on the front line. She was not obviously fighting, but helping the people who'd just been injured. Okay, so that's a really sort of big difference. Mary Seacole is seeing the horrors of war with her own eyes. Nightingale is seeing them as people make their way back, but Seacole is having this sort of very different experience. And she's having a really big impact. If we look at this, okay, her patients call her Mother Seacole. So they see her as a mothering figure. When they're at their sort of most needy, they see her as a mothering figure. When the war ended, Mary went back to Britain with very little money. She'd spent her money helping. She'd spent her money trying to help others. Okay, and it's a very selfless act. Okay, she's not being paid. Soldiers wrote letters to newspapers praising what she had done. The Times war correspondent, Sir William H. Russell, wrote of Mary in 1857, I trust that England will not forget one who nursed her sick, who sought out her wounded to aid and succour them, and who performed the last offices for some of her illustrious dead. All those who admired her came to her aid, whether soldiers, generals, or members of the royal family. In 1857, a fundraising gala was held for her over 4 nights on the banks of the River Thames. Over 80,000 people attended. The same year, she published her autobiography, The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands, which became an instant bestseller. So the people wanted to help her, and the people did help her. 80,000 people went to the gala, the party, celebrating her and raising money for her. Okay, and then her book became a bestseller. So at the time, she was really fondly remembered and she was appreciated. However, Seacole is kind of lost in history temporarily. Mary died in London in 1881. Unfortunately, she was then lost to history for around 100 years until nurses from the Caribbean visited her grave in northwest London. So during the 1950s and 60s, lots of, and we'll talk about this next year, but lots of nurses from the Caribbean and India were invited over from the Empire to Britain to help out to sort of fund and to work in our new NHS. To this day, we look at the sort of the composition of people who are working in the NHS, okay, and it's made up of people from England, but people whose roots and origins can be traced all over the world, okay, often back to places that were controlled by Britain during the Empire. To illustrate that, I've included just this picture here. I searched NHS staff, and this picture here shows sort of the diverse makeup of people who work for the NHS. The NHS who are working so hard at the minute, okay, and we're clapping every Thursday for them, are made up of a variety of people, okay. So these nurses visited her grave and sort of started to talk about her again. The local MP, now Lord Clive Soley, promised to raise money for a statue for Mary. In 2004, Mary was voted the greatest Black Briton. Okay, that's a huge achievement. She's been heralded as she is the greatest Black Briton ever to live. Okay, and some of us may never have heard of her. Okay, Lord Soley launched the campaign for a statue after leaving the House of Commons. In 2016, the statue was finally unveiled in the grounds of St Thomas's Hospital on the London South Bank. And here is the statue now, with NHS staff and army staff stood out in front of it. So we're very proud to have this statue finally unveiled. Mary Seacole is a great role model. Her values of good citizenship, she always wanted to help the sick and wounded. Entrepreneurship, her drive took her to the Crimea under her own steam, and achievement, she remains one of history's greatest figures, hold true today. Okay, so yes, we started the lesson talking about Florence Nightingale, who's really important and has this sort of captured the nation's imagination. But Mary Seacole had as important a role, and we shouldn't forget that. People discuss why Mary Seacole's forgotten. You can look up this yourself, okay? And some think it's because maybe she was black and that wasn't popular at the time. Some think there's only space for a few successful women, and Florence Nightingale did that, so we don't need to worry about somebody else. But why it's important for us, okay, is it shows us how history has the power to sort of manipulate us, and we need to think, why was she not remembered? Now, hopefully, we know who she is. We can remember her. In your books, I'd like you to answer these 3 questions. I've given you some sentence starters to help you. Question number 3, it will be so far because you've done 1 and 2 already. What did Seacole do to help during the Crimean War? Why do you think she was voted the greatest Black Briton in 2004? And then explain why some think some of the emergency hospitals should be called Seacole hospitals. Now, the emergency hospitals are the hospitals that have been built all over the country. There's a few. There's one in Birmingham, one in London, one up in Scotland, I think one in Wales as well, and one in Manchester. And they're called the Nightingale hospitals. Some have said, well, maybe they should have different names. Maybe some should be called the Seacole hospitals. What I need you to do is write that sentence there for me, okay? And again, it's here, so you're working in your books. Let's get that done, please. So hopefully you've got some great notes in your books. Hopefully you can now use them notes to answer the 7 questions on the quiz. So where you're going to find the quiz, you're going to check the email from your teacher, okay? That email is going to have a link in it. That link is going to take you to your class's submission. Therefore, it's going to be easy for you to do because you're going to type it all in. Okay, your teacher's then going to get it through and they're going to be able to look at it, they're going to be able to mark it. You've then got the 3 long answer questions, and these are the ones we're going to look at, and these are the ones we're going to read, and these are where you're showing off your knowledge. So, the first one, what problems did patients in Crimean hospitals face? So you're going to think about Florence Nightingale and the reading we did there. Okay, if you've not got the information sheet, scan back through the video. Question 2. Why would some argue Mary Seacole acted in a selfless manner during the Crimean War? Selfless means she was very generous. She cared more about other people than herself. And then question 3. Identify and explain one similarity and difference between Nightingale and Seacole's stories. So question 3 has 2 parts to it. A similarity is a difference is. Okay, so let's be aware of that. Have a go at answering these questions, and I will see you in a few days' time with our next lesson. See you later.